on, bring them home.
Bring them home, bring them home, bring our brothers, our sisters home.
Welcome to Peace Now. My name is Trudy Quaife. I'm a member of Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace. We're a local organization of friends and neighbors who have been advocating for peace and justice for the past decade. I'm your host today, and joining me are Maud Easter and Mabel Leon. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maud has been an activist and an organizer for a peaceful U.S. foreign policy and for women's empowerment since the 1960s. Maud has lived in the Capital District since 1981 and has been active in Women Against War since it began in 2002. She loves being able to work for peace with other women. Mabel has raised 4 children as a single parent, and she has been very blessed to be actively involved in the lives of her grandchildren. Her children and grandchildren have been the inspiration and the motivation for her activism. She's been involved in peace, justice, human rights, and liberation struggles since the 1960s. Mabel wants to join with others to work together to change the priorities of our nation from war to peace, from inequality to equality, and from profits for a few to meeting the human needs of all. Before we begin our discussion about Women Against War, I'd just like to ask you if you each had anything to add as to why you decided to become peace activists. Maud?
Well, for me, I graduated from college in 1965, just as the Vietnam War was heating up. And so I was very active in my first job. I was working as a housing advocate for low-income people in Philadelphia. I'd worked a lot in the civil rights movement in college. My priorities were really to have the country's resources devoted to doing something about the appalling poverty at that time. And along came the Vietnam War, and the money just drained away. And that seemed horrible to me, and also all the terrible deaths in Vietnam. I was already very concerned about women around the world, and I saw women and their children being driven out of their homes, napalm, fields destroyed, country destroyed, no health care access left. It was terrible. So these things convinced me that war was not the answer to dealing with a foreign policy concern. And really, that issue of how the money drains away to the military has been a very big motivator for me ever since. And the terrible harms caused for war. And, that's what motivates me today in the work I do on Afghanistan and have done on Iraq and trying to prevent a war with Iran. It's all the same basic motivation.
Thanks, Maud.
Yeah.
How about you, Mabel?
Well, I feel like I've been an activist my whole life. I'm an old woman, and it's 50 plus years that I've been working on issues. I think I grew up on a farm, the oldest of 6 kids, and so that I had a job which was taking care of my brothers and sisters in addition to feeding the chickens and cleaning out the horse barn. But from the very beginning, I felt a real sense of responsibility in caring for others. When I came of age, and also I was a young mother, I had 2 babies by the time I was 22, and that left me with a huge sense of responsibility for others' lives. And I came of age in the period that Maud has referred to, the era of movement, mass movements for struggle, starting with civil rights, working to destroy the Jim Crow laws, working to get rid of discrimination, issues that we're still dealing with on many levels. And then the Vietnam War. And there are images in the Vietnam War, the images of war were in front of us. There are images of the Vietnam War that are seared in my memory forever. A little girl napalmed running down a road while her body burned. A young man shot in the head and crumpling to the ground. Those things motivated me to protest in every way I could. And it was not a protest against soldiers. It was a protest to put a flower in the gun and to move from destruction to construction. From Vietnam came the women's movement, and the women's movement empowered me to speak, and I have not lost my voice since then. And then there were struggles of self-determination by people in El Salvador, Nicaragua, Cuba, South Africa, and our government supported dictators to oppress people. Our government supported the system of apartheid. So that there was a real reason to struggle against what our government was doing. And in the last several years, I feel we've lived through a period of perpetual war. We will have been at war in Afghanistan for 12 years. And you know, I'd like to tell you, as an old lady in my 70s, I'd like to put my feet up and read, and I'd like to get out there in the garden and plant my flowers. But those are side events to what is very important, because the struggles are still big. And what I want to do through action is to motivate others to find their voices and join us, because we have a very big task to turn things around.
Thank you, Mabel. Let's turn to Women Against War. Maud, could you tell us about Women Against War, how it was formed and when? And
Well, Women Against War started 10 years ago. We were excited to celebrate our 10th anniversary, just like Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace last fall. In the fall of 2002, as President Bush was pushing forward on his plans to invade Iraq, we came together as a group of women, wanting to work together as women because many of us had been working with other women on various issues related to women's rights in the past decades. We'd worked together on sexual assault issues and against domestic violence, on reproductive health. We knew each other, we liked to work together, and here was this terrible threat of war diverting resources from the things we really cared about and threatening the lives of other women and children. So we came together, and one of the first projects we did was a fast for peace. In December of 2002, we started a 3-month-long fast until International Women's Day, March 8th in 2003. And it was a rotating fast. We involved over 100 women who each fasted for 24 hours at one location at the Women's Building in Albany. And for everyone involved, I think it was a time of individual commitment and also group commitment, that we were going to work together to do everything we could to stop that war. We also did things with other groups around the country during that time. Many of us went to New York for the big march that was part of the global effort that involved, on one day, 10 million people saying no to war in Iraq. And we did other projects here in Albany. But I think that project of the fast kind of put us on the local map. The media were very interested in it, and we made many contacts with the media during that time that have allowed us to publicize our peace concerns in the years since. We had a closing ceremony for the fast at the end of the 3 months in the well of the Legislative Office Building. And women who had fasted, many of them, came together to share the experiences, to talk about why they had done it. And that got a lot of attention, a lot of press coverage, and people knew about us, knew that women were against this war. And that bolsters the spirits of other people to see visible public advocacy on foreign policy. If you're thinking about it in your living room, you're wondering whether you agree or not with a foreign policy issue, to see women in public taking a stand on this, that's one of the tools we use to make a difference in the community.
I remember that event. I thought that was a very powerful thing for you to do. It was really impressive. How many members does Women Against War have?
We have over 400 now. And those women, I think, get involved with our work in many different ways. We have 6 projects going on right now. And for each of those projects, we have a committee that plans what we're going to do. And some women are involved that way in a planning process. Other women come to the events we have. They come and demonstrate. They help us get a speaker scheduled in their faith community. They teach somewhere and they get one of our speakers into their classes. Or, they get our email. We have a great email list and we share opportunities. Just sign this petition and you can help stop our going to war with Iran. Sign this petition, you can bring our troops home from Afghanistan. And these are, really good, concrete ways people can take a few minutes of their day and we can involve other women in our work. We have a website, we have a Facebook page, we have a blog on the Times-Union called Waging Peace on their Times-Union website. And those are ways we reach out to other women too, and we sometimes invite women to be guest writers for that, but also we just send our message out that way and give people an analysis of what's going on with U.S. foreign policy, why it's so important to look to diplomacy, to look to development as alternatives to turning to our military to step in and wreak carnage
Yes.
and really not advance security for people in this country.
Okay, thank you. Mabel, would you want to talk about some of the projects, some of the specific projects that Women Against War has done?
Well, I'll start with one of my personal favorites, Grannies for Peace. And by the way, to prove I'm a granny and an old lady, I'm wearing these glasses because I just had a cataract removed. What I love about Grannies for Peace, it is a group of women that come together really motivated by love. The personal love in their family for their children and grandchildren or their nieces and nephews. And it is really a statement of love that we want to make a better world for those that are going to follow us. And I'll talk about some of the activities that we've done that show this. We really want to emphasize the face of war, because very often we hear statistics on the news, but we don't see the horror of war. We want to bring that forth. The other thing is that as grandmothers and as aunts and of nieces and nephews, we really want to have the next generation be safe. We want them to be able to be educated. We want them to have health care. We want them to have housing. We want them to pursue a happy life. And we understand that we are not only people on the face of the earth that feel that way about their children and grandchildren. It is mothers and grandmothers all over the world. And so we want to have that for all children everywhere. Some of the activities that we've done, we focused on Valentine's Day, because Valentine's Day is a symbol, a holiday of love. And what we have done is we make the statement that war breaks grannies' hearts. We have done demonstrations in which we point out the civilian casualties that happen. War does not happen on a war field. It happens in villages and homes and cities. And the casualties so often are civilians, women and their children. And so we want to point this out to the public. The other actions that we've done have involved veterans, because we are not against soldiers. In fact, we are very concerned about the young men and women who have been sent by our nation into areas where they have been killed, they have been injured, they come back with injuries that you can't see, and we have advocated for services for veterans. We have advocated pointing out that there has been a great deal of sexual assault of young women in the military. We have advocated for services. We have stood with our signs in front of the Veterans Hospital, meeting with administrators in the Veterans Hospital and talking to our local politicians about getting services for our veterans. This Mother's Day, which is another holiday that gets celebrated in a very positive way in our country, one year we carried a coffin through Washington Park emphasizing those young people that we have lost and grieving with mothers who have lost their children, and knowing that we have lost many and that the numbers who have other kinds of injuries is 10 times as much as those who have died, and that the civilian deaths are 50 times as much as the deaths that we have suffered of our own. This year, we stood in white as guardians of peace, and we handed out carnations to mothers throughout the park, really with the message that we know that women care about their children and grandchildren, and we know that mothers don't want violence. And so we are urging people to join us. I will talk a little bit. I work also on the issue of Afghanistan, a member of a committee that looks at Afghanistan. And we have tried in many ways to bring a message in different ways. We used the American Friends Service project, Windows and Mirrors, to bring an art exhibit, a juried art exhibit with murals that show the face of war. And we stood again in the Legislative Office building with 50 murals. And then those murals went out to area colleges along with speakers, and we put them in malls, and we put them in art exhibits, again trying to reach people with the message that we want to turn the destruction into construction. And in Afghanistan, we want to bring our troops home, all our troops. We want to bring our special forces home. We don't want bases to stay in Afghanistan. And we want to make it very clear that those drones kill civilians. So we want those drone attacks to stop in Afghanistan, Yemen, Pakistan. We want to bring those resources home and invest in our own society, create jobs repairing the infrastructure, create green jobs, invest in health and education, turn our efforts from destruction to construction.
Very good. Thank you. Maud, do you want to talk a little bit more about some other things that Women Against War has done to gain attention in the community for these issues that Mabel discussed?
Yeah, that's a good question, because that's the challenge before us always. How can we get people to focus in on a foreign policy issue? Lots of other issues consume our lives, and for good reasons. But if our country is doing things out in the world that are wasting money and making us more insecure, we all have a stake in having a solution. So, for example, on the issue of Iran, which is something Women Against War has worked on a lot in the last few years, one of the first things we did was raise money to be able to put up a billboard that made our position really clear, that we thought it would be disastrous for the U.S. to go to war with Iran, that military action was not the solution, that instead there should be serious diplomatic negotiations. And that billboard got a lot of people's attention, and at a time that the papers and the media were not really covering the voices of people who were saying no to war in Iran, it was a good way to get our views in the map locally, to get people in the Capital District who maybe were worried about this themselves to realize that other people were, and that's part of it. The other thing is that we've been able to use the attention we've gotten around Iran then to propose to people what are alternative solutions. And one of the ways we do this is that we're very lucky on our Iran task force. We have 5 women who've traveled to Iran. They do a lot of speaking to classes, to faith groups, and other places in the community about the Iranians they met, what it would mean in that society to have bombs falling, what it would mean in terms of the Middle East and in terms of preserving some level of humanity for us as well. Do we want to be involved in killing these Iranians that they can tell us about? So we've combined the sort of very public actions with a lot of educational programs. We bring in national experts on Iran policy too, because one of the things that's very important to us in Women Against War is making sure people see that there's an alternative to the military action. They see that instead of just threatening Iran, there are ways we could be negotiating with Iran to broaden the discussion. It doesn't only have to be about nuclear issues. The United States needs Iran's help with the situation in Syria. It needs Iran's help with the situation in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And there are ways that there could be a solution that would be beneficial to the Iranians and beneficial to Americans. So far, our government hasn't really pursued that large picture approach, which has much more likelihood of success in avoiding war. And so we have brought in a fellow from the National Iranian American Council last year, Trita Parsi, Dr. Trita Parsi, who has interviewed Iranian, Israeli, and U.S. diplomats about these negotiations and just published a book on it. And had him speak at the Writers' Institute, at Siena College, with the media, about the alternatives. And it's a way to give people hope that there are alternatives to going to war. That's one way. Then just a very different example. If you've ever seen a yard sign around the community that says, "Support our troops, bring them home now."
Bring them home.
That's from another project we undertook back in 2006, the time of the 3rd anniversary of the Iraq War, when we wanted again to let people in the community know that sort of the tide of public opinion was shifting, that lots of people were beginning to question this war, that it was time for the politicians to cut off the funding to it. And we came up with the idea that we would, again, buy a billboard, which we did, that had that same message on it. And with the help of, I think it was 24 other sister organizations in the Capital District, we managed to get almost 2,000 yard signs distributed quietly to people all around the community. And on the morning of the 3rd anniversary of the war, they went up, they sprouted all over the community. We decorated the community with that message, and again, it got a lot of attention. And, you know, if you drive around now, you still see many of those yard signs. And they're just as relevant to getting the troops out of Afghanistan as they were to getting the troops out of Iraq.
They are. Mine is still in my yard.
Yeah, mine too.
Mine too.
Well, we're rapidly running out of time. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I have 2 questions left for you. One, I was wondering if you could briefly talk about what Women Against War is focusing on right now. What do you think the most critical issues are today?
You want to go ahead?
Well, there are several groups within Women Against War, and each of those groups, in a way, acts with trust on their own issue. So unfortunately, there are many, many issues confronting us today. Bring our troops home from Afghanistan, all our troops. Drones is a huge issue in which there has been a lot of miseducation of the American public, and we have a huge job to get real information out about drones, that they do indeed kill civilians. That is a very, very major thing. We always hear that all options are still on the table, and that always seems to mean that war is always on the table, or armed action. We'd like to take those alternatives off the table. We would like our politicians to learn how to use their brains and their mouths to solve issues. The way we talk to, when little children have a conflict, we tell them, you can solve this through words. You can solve this by talking to each other. Well, we would like our politicians and our State Department to learn how to do this, because it is not done just by threatening a bigger bomb. I don't know.
Well, in terms of work that we'll be doing this summer and going into the fall, sort of the next season of our work, there are lots of ways women who are interested in peace could get involved with us. We're scheduling speakers for the fall right now on Afghanistan and Iran.
Oh, good.
You know, that always
Drones.
brings, the drones project has just gotten started in Women Against War and is planning activities for the fall. We also are in the midst of a lobbying campaign. The Iran Project is. We've met with our two representatives, Congressman Tonko and Congressman Gibson. We were able to meet with the staff of Senator Gillibrand, and we are very eager to meet with Senator Schumer because all four of our representatives from our area have foreign policy initiatives that they can take, and we're looking to them to take leadership from a peace perspective, which hasn't always been true. But we want to encourage them in that direction. Representative Tonko, Congressman Tonko, actually has been very supportive of most of the positions that we take, which is great. But there's a lot of work to do, and we form lobbying teams to go and meet with legislators, and that's an area people can help us in.
Okay, good. Well, we're down to 3 minutes here, so I have one final question. Mabel, could you talk to us a little bit about the message that you'd like to leave people with today?
Well, what I would say to people today is that we need you. And we know, looking at polls, that the majority of Americans don't want wars to just continue in perpetuity. And we know that people are very aware of the needs at home. But what we have to grow is our people power. We have to grow our influence. And we need you. And there are so many ways that you can be involved. Different people are comfortable doing different things. Not everyone is comfortable standing on the street. Not everyone is comfortable writing a letter, but there's always something you can do. And actually, action is a way of really empowering yourself so you don't feel helpless on these very huge issues. And you also have the support of other people who believe that there are other alternative ways to violence. We have a big issue around gun violence in this country, and this is one issue that we want to work with mothers and women to face. We want to end gun violence in families, on the streets, in our communities, and in war. There are better ways to solve our problems. War is not the answer. So we urge you to go on our website, www.womenagainstwar.org.
That's it.
Yes,
And,
it should be on
and
the
if
screen.
you just Google or Yahoo or whatever search mechanism you use, Women Against War. The other thing is, my name is Mabel Leon. And if you feel you want to talk to a person on the other end of the telephone, I have a listed telephone number and we'd be glad to take your call. We need you. We urge you to join us.
Thank you. That's a great way to end it. I'm so glad to have both of you here today. You're two of my favorite people, and it was just such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank
you,
you,
Trudy, for all
Mutual
you do.
Admiration Society.
Well, join us in the future. We'll have episodes. I think our next guest will be from Occupy Albany, and they'll talk about where the Occupy Albany movement is now. We also hope to do an episode in the future on hydrofracking and also on what wars have done to our economy, both at the national level and locally. So join us in the future, and thank you very much for being here today.